Hello, I'm Nada.
Hello, I'm Liz. I used to work for Amnesty International for 20 years.
What is Amnesty International?
Amnesty International is an international organisation. It was founded exactly 50 years ago now. It's just been celebrating its 50th anniversary. And it was founded by a lawyer in London called Peter Benenson, who was he was said to be travelling in the underground and read in a paper that some Portuguese or Spanish people in a cafe had been sentenced to imprisonment because they'd raised their glasses and said, "To liberty." And then he said, we should fight to get an amnesty, that means liberty, freedom, for all people whom he called prisoners of conscience. That is to say, people who were put in prison simply because of what they thought, without wanting any violence. So it was founded for that reason, and at once people all over the world started to support this idea that you should never be put in prison for what you believed in. It was founded in 1961, and over the past 50 years it's evolved, and now it deals with human rights, the rights of people all over the world, and all sorts of rights, not only the right to freedom of speech, but also economic and social rights at the same time.
When did your involvement in Amnesty International begin?
Well, I got a job there first in 1989, and my job was as a researcher. That means that I look at the countries and try to see what is happening there which is against human rights. We say a violation of human rights. So I first of all was working in North Africa and working on Morocco, where there were a lot of people who were in prison for their beliefs, for simply peaceful opposition, and there were many other people who were not even in prison, but who had simply disappeared. They were kept in secret prisons where nobody knew where they were.
So what did you do about that?
The point about amnesty is not just to record what is happening and to give information of what is happening, though that's extremely important, because if the information isn't accurate, you can't get anywhere. But it's to change things. If we can't change things, then we're no good at all. And so a lot of our work is thinking how to campaign to get the world to change and become a better place.
What are the different ways you use for campaigning?
Well, one of the basic ways is we have groups all over the world. In schools, in universities, in towns, in villages, and we used to adopt prisoners who were in for their beliefs or who had suffered an injustice, and the people used to write letters in order to try to get them released. And they would write to the king, the president, the ministers, the head of the prison, and to their own governments to ask them to put pressure to get the people released. And they'd write to the person themselves. That was one way of doing it. And sometimes prisoners found this wonderful. There was one prisoner who was in Sudan and was the focus of a Christmas card campaign by the British section of Amnesty International in about 1991. He was a poet, and he said in his prison cell, he suddenly got 4,000 cards. They had to be carried to him by sacks. He put them all around the cell, and everyone was just lifted up to know that they weren't alone in the world in this prison where they'd been put for opposing the government, but that people all over the world were thinking about them.
What campaigns have you been involved in?
Well, the first campaign was actually to get change in Morocco, because there were so many political prisoners. Morocco had conquered the southern area of the Western Sahara and arrested hundreds of Sahrawi, and kept them in secret prisons. And so for 15 years, this was 1991, and they had been arrested from the late 1970s. So for over 15 years, they had disappeared, and nobody even knew whether they were alive or dead. So in this campaign, we worked with the Moroccans who wanted change. We worked with Moroccan exiles who wanted change. We worked with the United Nations. We tried to put pressure on the governments of the world to put pressure on Morocco, and we sent thousands of letters to Morocco. We tried all different ways that you can imagine of campaigning, of demonstrating in the streets, sending delegations to the Moroccan embassy, and so on. We did all kinds of things.
Did you work in other countries after that?
Yes, I worked in several countries. For instance, at the same time as Morocco, we started to work in Algeria. Now, Algeria had been quite a country where there hadn't been torture, but then there was a civil war and torture started again. We worked in Tunisia, where it's a wonderful holiday spot. People keep on going there, but there were so many prisons. It was such a repressive rule, and the president was Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali, who didn't allow any freedom of expression. He kept on talking about human rights, but there were no human rights in the country. And now, this year, it's 2011, and at last, after so many years, he has been forced out of of power by peaceful demonstrations by his people. I also worked in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, where also people have been suffering human rights violations. I worked in Iraq after the Allies came into Iraq, looking at what was happening in the past and what they were doing to the Iraqi people. I worked in Sudan because especially it was difficult when the government was was attacking and killing people in the west of the country in Darfur. So I've worked in many different areas, but in each time we try to work to change the situation, and we try to think how ordinary people all over the world who care about human rights can change the situation.
What is the thing that you've been most proud of during your work?
I'll say a big thing and a little thing, and they both came from my first year. The big thing was that actually we did get change in Morocco, that 350 people came out of these secret prisons whom nobody thought they would ever see alive again. And that is most moving. And another thing is, when I was in Morocco, I went to a lawyer's office, and he said, I'm a member of Amnesty International, and look, I've just written this letter about 2 people in Cambodia, that's in Asia, a long way away, who have been put in prison for their beliefs. And I thought, here is someone in Morocco suffering appalling situation and violations, and yet he's writing a letter about 2 people in Cambodia. that shows that the world is one. Because you're suffering, you don't forget about people far away in other parts of the world.
How do young people get involved in Amnesty International?
There are lots of groups in schools, in secondary schools, even sometimes in primary schools, and they may work on the sufferings of children and children who are in prison, or they may work on any question over the world, and they also write letters. They also may put up exhibitions or do what they can to get the person released, or they might write letters. I remember there was one lawyer she and her husband had been put in prison, and they all wrote letters to her daughter, and the daughter wrote letters back, and so the daughter wrote had received lots of letters. Again, in Tunisia, they were arresting a lot of high school students, and the Amnesty group wrote to the people who were in prison, the boys. They didn't get any of the letters, but one group were very clever. They wrote to the school, and when the boy came out of prison a year later, there was a pile of letters for him to show him that he hadn't been forgotten whilst he was suffering in prison.
Do you think you've accomplished anything during your work?
Well, I told you how optimistic I was in the first couple of years when we worked on Morocco and we accomplished things. And since then, I've worked on a lot of countries and we haven't accomplished so much. We've worked on Israel, and the Israeli and Palestinian question are not at all solved and people are still suffering. We worked on Sudan. The world looked and saw what was happening in Sudan, and yet the situation is still bad. But I still believe we have to be optimistic, and we have to think that if the people decide that they're not going to accept injustices, that the injustices will end in the end.
Liz, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you. It's been a very great pleasure, and I'm sure you and your friends will do a lot to solve the problems of the world.